but all of us here on stage, because global climate crisis called for global solidarity. We're delighted to have with us the resident coordinator of the UN, but also WFP country director. And it is also important in anything we do at ARC to have the African Development Bank among us because of the role they play at ARC. And that is why we're delighted to have the Director General here covering Nigeria. Last but not least, the reason why we're doing this is because of the REC. We have the Executive Secretary among us, and that is really a testimony that global climate crisis called for global solidarity, and we're delighted to have everyone over here. Let me say a few words on why we're doing this, but more importantly, what we intend to cover and the commitment we're prepared to make as an institution to make sure we deliver on behalf of our member states. I think the why side is the timing of this discussion is extremely important. Unfortunately, recently, we have actually conducted a study on the state of climate change across Africa. We are unfortunately dealing with extreme weather conditions getting worse, but not getting better. And those worsening situations have an impact on the most vulnerable, so human face of climate change, which we should all be inspired, excuse me, to do more because of the most vulnerable across Africa being affected by the flood and the drought and all the extreme weather conditions that we're faced with. It is timely because the world is about to host a climate gathering in Baku, in Abu Dhabi, in Azerbaijan, sorry, whereby climate finance is the theme of this year. It is important the African voice be heard and Africa not being left out. So gathering like this will help us to really further strengthen the importance of the African voice, but also the expectation from Africa. This meeting is timely because a couple of months ago, we gathered in Johannesburg on an African climate roundtable where we looked at the need for Africa in scaling up climate finance. And one of the key takeaways was the importance of joining our forces to make sure we at least put the African demand and expectation on the table. So that is why this is important for us to really be able to walk away from this conversation with clarity in terms of what we want as Africa. And in the true African Union motto, African solution to African problems. And that is why this meeting is important. Now, over the course of half a day, we'll be spending a lot of time talking about how do we plan better? How do we prepare ourselves better so we can respond to disasters? But more importantly, how do we respond together as a team? And that's why you will hear from our different conversations, the lesson that we learned, but all of this, putting the REC in the middle of it, because ultimately, without the REC, we can't deliver for our member states because of the proximity that you have to our member state, and that's why this is important. Let me end by saying two things. First of all, our commitment as a group to continue working with all the players on stage here, or on the table, the high table, there's no stage, so that we can deliver on behalf of our member state, and that's a commitment we're prepared to make as ARC. Second, we look forward to the recommendation of the discussions and make sure we can actually improve the way we do our business in our countries, because ultimately there are millions of Africans who are affected by climate change and we can't fail them. And that's why it's important that we have this gathering this morning and see ways in which to improve our work. The way this high-level opening will take place, we'll hear obviously from different leaders, global, Africans, and REC. Since this is all about the REC, and the first person I would like to invite to say a few words, obviously, is the Executive Secretary of SADC, who graced us with his presence so early in the morning, and because of our commitment. So, Mr. Executive Secretary, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, DG. And very good morning to everyone. Good morning. The Africa Risk Capacity Group, Director General, my dear President, colleagues, CEOs of RECs, our representatives, the representative from the African Development Bank, and our partners who are in our midst as well. Once more, good morning to you all. I think I'm just going to give an account of what we experience as a region. And I want to believe it's not only unique to SADC, but it cuts across some other regions of our continent. But it is a tale of what goes through in our lives and how we try to address some of these emergencies and why Africa Risk Capacity becomes a very important institution to support and work with our member states. First, to thank you for inviting us to this event. I do recognize the theme, Regional Climate Disaster Risk Financing and Outbreaks and Epidemics Management Approaches to promote risk transfer instruments for emergency response. The topic, as you rightly said, is timely and it is relevant in our view as well, given certainly the unprecedented diverse negative impacts of climate change. And sometimes it's not only climate change, but it's also conflicts. So all these do affect our citizens. The Southern African Development Community, or SADC for short, has not been spared. It has faced and continues to face significant risks from natural disasters, including floods, droughts, cyclones, and epidemics. According to the International Disaster Database, they call it EMDAT, over a period of 8 years between 2015 and last year, 2023, more than 121 million people in our region were affected by disasters. 121 million people of a population of about 170 million. With economic damages approximating US $107 billion. Historically, the region has been prone to droughts and/or protracted dry spells, resulting in water shortages, chronic food insecurity, and malnutrition. In 2015, the region suffered the worst drought in 30 years. And we believe this is going to get worse with the increasing warming of the globe. Back then, with approximately 40 million people in need of immediate life-saving and life-sustaining humanitarian assistance. Since then, the disaster profile of the region has changed significantly, with increased epidemics and a rise in tropical systems that have continued to deliver heavy rains and floods, resulting in the loss of lives and livelihoods, destruction of critical infrastructure, and disruption of national services, as well as overall regression in development gains over time. In 2019, the region experienced the worst tropical cyclone to ever hit the Southern Hemisphere. I think you might remember this one, Cyclone Idai. It was the deadliest cyclone ever, with over 1,500 lives lost in our region, and the most costly disaster accounting for US $3.3 billion in overall damages, and US $1 billion dedicated purely to infrastructure damages. This is that it just touched 4 of our member states: Madagascar, Malawi, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe. Covered more. What would be the price to pay? The frequency of cyclonic systems in the region has drastically increased in frequency, intensity, and severity since then. aggravating vulnerabilities and producing higher mortality rates, repeated infrastructure damage, and more livelihood losses. The region is currently in a state of emergency as we speak, following the launch of the SADC Regional Humanitarian Appeal of $5.5 billion US dollars, which was done by the Extraordinary Summit of May 20th this year. The appeal followed the impacts of El Nino-induced drought and floods, affecting more than 61 million people in the region. To date, 6 member states have declared a national state of disaster, and more member states are expected to declare as soon as they complete in-depth national assessments. Recognizing the above challenges, which are commonplace, SADC region developed the SADC Disaster Preparedness and Response Strategy and Fund of 2016 to 2023, which is intended to reduce the negative impacts of these disasters across sectors by the year 2030. The strategy has led to the development of a SADC Regional Disaster Fund to support member states affected by disasters. The region has also been the most hard hit by COVID-19 pandemic in the entire continent. While countries are still recovering, several of our member states are facing cholera epidemic, and more than 75% of cases in the continent, they come from the SADC region. Additionally, the outbreak of monkeypox in some member states from 2023 to date pose yet another real health threat to the region. And to address all these challenges, SADC Secretariat continues to collaborate closely with all different partners, including the World Health Organization and Africa CDC, to ensure that cholera and other epidemics and outbreaks are efficiently and significantly managed and eradicated from our region. In addition, the Secretariat has been working with other partners, and specifically the Africa Risk Capacity, to enhance disaster risk management. In this regard, we signed between ourselves an MOU, a 3-year MOU with Africa Risk Capacity in 2019, which provided a framework for collaboration between our two institutions. As a result, the ARC has been able to consult member states to consider buying insurance policies, initially focusing on drought. This, through such insurance policies, I'm aware that some member states have already benefited from these insurance payouts. This includes Madagascar, Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. I believe our list merges, Your Excellency. And this is for the previous droughts and floods. I'm also aware that following the 2023-24 drought and floods, several countries have again benefited from the insurance payout. It therefore remains my conviction and my commitment that more SADC member states should utilize the ARC's repertoire of insurance-related products to address disasters and related emergencies. It is a no-brainer that we should, and all our member states, especially those that are repeatedly at the receiving end of these disasters and emergencies, to actually do the needful and make sure that they become members and they do whatever is required to benefit from the ARC's insurance policies. Therefore, our review, or the review of the MOU between us, is therefore critical for continued advocacy to those member states that have not yet joined and benefited to do so without delay, and explore other disaster areas that continue to affect our region, in particular tropical cyclones and floods, but also droughts and epidemics. So with these remarks, it is my belief that this forum will bring real, practical, and worthwhile solutions and best practices for both the ARC, the RECs like ourselves, the African Union, our financing partners, to adopt and implement as we collectively respond to the contemporary, complex, and often unavoidable disasters and emergencies that have become a common occurrence in our region and the entire continent. I wish you all a successful deliberation. I thank you. Moderator.
Thank you very much for that call to action to increase the membership of ARC so we can get other countries in your region to join this instrument of solidarity of the African Union. Indeed, with the passing of El Nino in your region, ARC was able to actually provide $60 million of payout for 4 countries, benefiting millions of people in the region, and that is what ARC is all about. And I also was pleased for you to actually connect climate change and health outbreak and epidemic, because this is something also that ARC takes very seriously as part of protecting the most vulnerable. His institution has been extremely active in supporting African initiative in dealing with disasters management, climate change. In fact, if you don't know it, a couple of years ago, he funded a feasibility study looking at the possibility of establishing an Arab Africa Disasters Management Fund. You may have guessed by now I'm referring to Badea, who has been extremely active in supporting Africa. It is my honor to invite the president of Badea to address you, Mr. Sidita, His Excellency.
Excellencies, Head of Regional Economic Communities and distinguished representative of the REX, distinguished representative of the UN, AFDB, and international and diplomatic community, distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues and partners, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I am greatly delighted to attend this significant side meeting on regional climate disaster risk financing and outbreaks and epidemics management approaches, organized in collaboration with African Risk Capacity, ARC, Group, and the esteemed regional economic communities in Africa. As we gather here at the Labadi Beach Hotel in Accra, we are reminded of the pressing challenges that climate change and health emergencies pose to the African continent. The recent years have shown us the devastating impact of this crisis on the lives and livelihoods of millions of Africans. It is imperative that we come together to forge innovative solutions that enhance our resilience and preparedness. At the Arab Bank for Economic Development in Africa, BADEA, we recognize the vital role that disaster risk financing plays in safeguarding communities against the unpredictable nature of climate-related disaster and health outbreaks. Our commitment to supporting African nations in their development efforts aligns with our shared vision of a sustainable and resilient Africa. BADEA has undertaken several key initiatives to support climate disaster risk financing in Africa, including the study mentioned by Ibrahima on the establishment of an Arab African Disaster Financing Fund. But also recently, it includes providing a $500,000 US grant to ARC to progress the capacity building initiatives and contribute to building resilience to climate-induced disasters in 6 selected African countries, focusing on green and climate finance initiatives that contribute to sustainable development and environmental conservation, working closely with the African Union on the establishment of the said fund. Today, we have a unique opportunity to explore risk transfer instruments that can provide timely financial support during emergencies. By promoting this instrument, we can ensure that African countries are better equipped to respond to crises and recover swiftly, minimizing the impact on vulnerable population. I would like to commend the African Risk Capacity for its leadership in this area and its dedication to building capacity and fostering collaboration among member states and regional bodies. The partnerships we cultivate today will pave the way for a more integrated approach to disaster risk financing, enabling us to leverage resources and share best practices across the continent. I would also like to stress the importance of the role played by regional economic communities, such as SADC, in strengthening the member countries' resilience and supporting capacity development activities. As we embark on our discussions today, let us focus on actionable strategies that will enhance our collective response to climate disaster and health emergencies. Together, we can create robust interventions that not only addresses immediate needs, but also lays the ground for long-term resilience. In this light, our upcoming engagement at the UNCCF COP29 in Baku and UNCCD COP16 in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, will be essential to recognize the critical role these conferences will play in shaping our collective response to the climate crisis. As we prepare for those pivotal meetings, let us reaffirm our commitment to fostering collaboration and innovative solutions that addresses the unique challenges faced by African nations. Given the importance of land for the life and livelihood of the continent population, Badea is keen to support an active and bold participation of the African continent at the COP16 scheduled to take place in December in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. In conclusion, I urge all participants to engage actively, share insight, and collaborate on innovative solutions that will strengthen our disaster risk financing mechanism. Let us work together to build a safer and more prosperous future for all Africans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for your commitment, but also for your dedication to the partnership within your institution and the African Union, but also with the African Risk Capacity. Now, one of the things that we pride ourselves at the African Risk Capacity, we often say that ARC is a good example of how the AU and the UN can work together. Indeed, we are a specialized agency of the AU, but we are administered with the support of WFP. And that is a good example of how institutions can come together to deliver on behalf of the continent. And that is why we're delighted today to have with us the UN resident coordinator, who, in all fairness to him, has been extremely helpful for us in Ghana, both in advocating for our work, but also making sure that we bring Ghana to the pool of what ARC has to offer. So join me in welcoming the UN resident coordinator for his address. Mr. Mani, my friend.
Thank you, Ibrahima, ASG for ARC. While recognizing the presence here too of the SADC Executive Secretary, of course, the President of Badea, who is also a key collaborator in a number of other endeavors that are seeking to develop the continent. Of course, my brother from up the road, who is the AFDB DG in my home country, Nigeria, and works with my colleagues here. And of course, my sister, Barbara Clements, who's the country director of the World Food Programme, who are a key partner here. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all honored guests here. It's a great honor to be with you today at this crucial side meeting on regional disaster risk financing and outbreaks and epidemics management approaches. On behalf of the UN, development system here. I extend my gratitude to you, Ibrahima, UNASG and DG of the Africa Risk Capacity for the leadership and the invitation to make a statement here. And let me concur with you that over the last couple of years, we've worked quite closely to try and bring Ghana on board, and I'm pleased that we're making significant progress in that regard. Let me also recognize the role of regional economic commissions to actually start to work as a bridge to build across this space. And obviously recognize too the importance of financial institutions like AFDB, BADEA, and also my colleague UN agencies who support this, notably the World Food Programme and FAO, who contribute to this. We had a good conversation yesterday, Ibrahima. You know, we talked about risk and the fact that actually it's not the absence of risk that's the issue. It's how you plan to mitigate that risk that is at the core of this process. So there's a raft of different kinds of risk: political risk, economic risk, climate risk, which we're talking about, the risk of pandemics and the lessons we're learning from COVID-19, cybersecurity, some of the issues we even faced just yesterday, globally, and conflict. And we know, for instance, that 21 countries on this continent are affected by conflict. Africa faces some of the biggest cybersecurity challenges. I'm not broadening your mandate, but I'm already telling you there are other areas that we could be working. And so really the frequency and intensity of climate-induced natural disasters coupled with the current outbreaks and epidemics pose a serious threat. But they do everywhere. And I think the challenge is not that they do. The challenge is what are we doing about it? And I think this is where ARC is really important. And so as we convene at the mid-year point here of the Africa Union coordination meeting, the importance of coordination, collaboration, pooling of risk, pooling of resources has never been more important. And we commend ARC for the crucial role that you're playing in enhancing the preparedness and disaster risk management capacity for African governments and leveraging innovative financing solutions in a really complex environment financially, globally, as well as supporting capacity and strategic partnerships. Let me also commend Rex, because I think you provide the bridge between countries and a region and help to see the picture at a broader level beyond just an immediate country. And this is critical for finding solutions. So I think this meeting is really important in addressing these particular areas. I think other speakers have talked about the various events and the impacts that they've had. But recently we know that 29 million people continue to face unrelenting drought conditions across a number of countries. And I think we've talked about the impacts of Cyclone Freddy and flash floods on different people, so I won't bore you with that. Africa faces significant economic risk also from stranded fossil fuel assets, potentially worth 1.3 trillion by 2050. Heavy reliance on these commodities underscores the need for the strategic shifts towards renewable energy to avoid economic losses and support sustainable development. So we also need to grow a whole pool of new financing as we respond to our energy needs, which are at the moment hardly met. Risk mitigation measures are essential for building resilience against multidimensional risk. And Africa's risk profile hinders economic growth, with a premium of 4 to 6% added to investment costs due to perceived risks, according to the AFDB. So effective risk mitigation can reduce this premium, attract investment, and promote growth. And so beyond actually just saving lives, which as of itself is important, there are other benefits that accrue from this. This initiative significantly aligns with the UN's promotion and the adoption of 6 investment pathways. From last year, after the SDG summit, 6 pathways were identified as critical to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and indeed contributing to achieving Africa's Agenda 2063. investment in food systems, access and affordability of energy, digital connectivity, education, jobs and social protection, and the impacts of climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, and waste. All of these areas pose significant risk, and ARC is really well positioned to reduce those and enable the continent to grow to achieve its objectives. Ghana has demonstrated leadership, and we're pleased now that they're finally at the leadership table here. The preparation of an energy transition plan, related climate vulnerability plans, as well as investments to unlock the potential of the carbon markets. And my colleagues in WFP are deeply involved in this. These initiatives afford Ghana the opportunity to revise strategies and integrate emerging policies to ensure Ghana is able to grow. So through the efforts of a number of agencies, and particularly notably here, the work of WFP, the work also of UNDP around the NDC 3.0 revision process, which helps us to distill and identify where the opportunities are to actually mitigate those risks and to use financing in this way. I think we are really on the road. And we recently in the UN, through the efforts and coordination of WFP, completed the CADRI assessment, which will help us to look at how to establish a set of responses, including flood-related risk insurance, to enable Ghana to be prepared for this. I urge you all to engage with this. I've added that there are other risks that Ghana particularly faces, and while this is not within your core mandate, I think ARC can facilitate some of those conversations on important issues. Ghana, and in fact Accra, sits on an earthquake epicenter, and we know that while, inshallah, it will never happen, the whole purpose of insurance is to avoid that kind of mindset. And we know what that would do to one of Africa's emerging hubs. Ghana is definitely an emerging hub. And so really promoting this whole business of ensuring that we learn the lessons from COVID-19, that we don't leave ourselves running, chasing the impacts of risk, and that we are prepared, absolutely prepared to continue on our growth paths on the continent here, while having the resources available to enable us manage the impacts of the disasters that will naturally come because of the impacts of climate change, and I think the changing disease profile globally. Let us continue to work together, and let me assure you that the UN system will continue to support this initiative with you, both at the continental level and at the global level, and certainly here in Ghana. And wish you the best for today's activities. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, my brother, for underscoring the importance of it's not a matter of risk, it's what you do to mitigate the risk. And ARC certainly is ready to play its part in making sure that we can anticipate and make sure, as you often say, no one is left behind. It is also important to underscore, under the leadership of the Secretary General, we are making efforts to mainstreaming early warning systems, because they do save lives in our continent, but more importantly, it allows our policymakers to make informed decisions when they come to dealing with disasters as well. Now, the president of the African Development Bank, if you watch his speech on what we do, he's one of our biggest advocate and ambassador, because he believed not only in ARC, but also he believed in African solution to African problems, and that's what ARC is all about. The bank has also been extremely supportive in making sure that premium financing is affordable and accessible to African countries so they can actually subscribe to the ARC policies. And that is why it's very important to have among us a representative of the African Development Bank. In this case, the Vice President, Marie-Laure Akin Olumbade, who is the Vice President of Regional Development, has given us the opportunity to welcome my brother, the Director General of the bank in Nigeria, Dr. Abdul Kamara, who is a strong advocate of what we do thanks to his passion and his commitment, and I'd like you to welcome him to say a few words on behalf of the bank.
Your Excellency, the Executive Secretary of SADC, my brother, the ASG Ibrahima, DG for ARC, or the Africa Risk Capacity, my brother and friend, Dr. Sidi Uta, President of the Badia Group, Mr. Charles Abani, UNRCHC, my sister Barbara Clemens, CD or Country Director for WFP. It's an honor to be here. And firstly, let me thank the African Risk Capacity for giving the African Development Bank the opportunity to say a few words on this august occasion on the margins of the media summit of the African Union. It is an honor to join you today to discuss a topic of critical importance to our continent, promoting innovative disaster risk transfer solutions for emergency responses. Let me again salute the Director General of the Africa Risk Capacity for convening this very important meeting at this crucial time. Of course, we know that Africa has a history of resilience in the face of numerous challenges, from pandemics, but also from climate-induced disasters. But what we also know, and what others have already said, is the fact that most of the response is reactive sometimes, making it very, very costly for us, but also taking these disasters to a magnitude that can sometimes be very difficult to manage, loss of lives, property, infrastructure, and subsequently slow economic growth. Today, I will share some insights on how we at the African Development Bank, and of course, all of us can also transform our approach to disaster risk management through proactive and innovative solutions, leveraging the power of our partnerships, which is really the key of why we are here right now. The African Development Bank, as we all know, as we already heard, has been at the forefront of supporting African nations in responding to and recovering from disasters. Notable instances include our response to the West Africa Ebola outbreak in 2014, which was very disastrous for our countries, which also led to massive losses of life. And of course, during the COVID pandemic as well, we took leadership. These experiences have underscored the necessity of strengthening health systems and ensuring early detection to prevent outbreaks from expanding, but also to ensure that we build capacity, to control. So building on these lessons from this crisis, the bank launched several measures when we had the COVID-19 outbreak, including a $10 billion COVID crisis response facility, which was launched for the low-income countries. And of course, that facility set out to do three things. The first, to strengthen health systems. That includes personnel, it includes equipment, PPP, and so on. It also set out to inject liquidity in the economies. Don't forget, the crisis was a double whammy for countries. Countries has already done their budgeting, without taking crisis into consideration. So they had to now readjust and spend more at a time when economies were stalled and they were basically going down. So we also had to ensure that we inject liquidity into the system. For countries like Ethiopia, for example, we gave a $165 million grant. Kenya, we had an operation upwards of $200 million, and countries like Nigeria, far upwards of $300 million during the COVID crisis. And then the third aspect was social protection, which was also very, very key. And of course, the African Union, as we have heard already, remains relevant in all of these. The Africa CDC was very, very nascent. We needed an entity to coordinate the continental response, but also to organize and convene. So we had to approve a $28 million grant for the Africa CDC to take this leadership, which they did, and indeed they did it very, very effectively. We also extended a help to the WHO, I think with a $2 million grant and so on. So these, from the health perspective, we are very, very good. But if there is only one lesson that we were left with, was the fact that never again should this continent be faced with a situation of a pandemic or a health emergency where we find ourselves the least in terms of priority, be it vaccines and so on and so forth. So in this context, as my colleague just said, the president of the African Development Bank took the bold step to initiate a conversation of setting up a $2 billion African Pharmaceutical Technology Foundation. This is done, it's already established. You have President Kagame is on the board. I think you have the chairperson of the African Union, and you have other prominent Africans on the board. So what is the APTF doing? The APTF is going to eliminate all barriers in terms of access to technology for pharmaceuticals, medicals, and so on and so forth. I will switch to climate change very quickly. Of course, many of us will be aware of our ADRIFI, the Africa Disaster Risk Financing Program, which has been running since 2018 in close collaboration with the Africa Risk Capacity. This has been mainly on the sovereign side, and it has been very, very successful, focusing on agriculture. In other words, the risk in agriculture against climate disasters. The facility has been able to mobilize or disburse some $180 million to 16 member countries from the Sahel all the way to Southern Africa. And I think it has protected some 6 million smallholder farmers. But one thing we believe that has been missing also is really the role of the private sector, emphasizing the role of the private sector, but also ensuring that we de-risk transactions that will enable, the private sector to step in at a scale, that will support our efforts going forward. So in that context, and to further enhance our effort, the African Development Bank is designing the Africa Climate Risk Insurance Facility for Adaptation. It's called ACRIFA, Africa Climate Risk Insurance Facility for Adaptation. This ambitious facility aims to mobilize $1 billion in concessional financing, but also high-risk capital and grants that will de-risk private sector interventions in climate insurance solutions. We want to be comprehensive this time, so ACRIFA will extend climate protection beyond the sovereign level, as I was saying earlier, but also to provide end-to-end insurance coverage across agricultural value chains and supporting smallholder farmers. So in addition, we are also discussing and thinking of introducing what we call a debt pause clauses. The debt pause clauses is for countries that will be hit by disasters, which will be specifically defined over a specific time period to the extent that their debt service burden will be paused. And if this conversation gains traction, it is not only going to be the African Development Bank, it will also be others like the World Bank, Badia, and so on. They will all be around the table and we will see. So this is really very important for what I said earlier, with regards to pressure, fiscal pressure on our countries. As our success is hinging on partnership, of course, the bank has collaborated with key institutions. I have just indicated our strong collaboration with the Africa Risk Capacity Group, but also with IFIs, Badia, World Bank, UNAFPs, agencies, funds, and programs, including WFP. There are even instances where countries like Sudan, in kind of the situation where they are now, if a disaster hits where we don't have a capacity, we give the allocation to WFP or WHO, $20 million, $30 million, and they do what we cannot do. So that is the kind of innovative partnerships that we are talking about. In conclusion, proactive disaster risk management is not just an option, but a necessity for safeguarding Africa's development gains. By leveraging innovative disaster risk financing solutions and strengthening partnerships, we can build a resilient and sustainable future for our continent. And therefore, I urge all stakeholders, all of us present in this room, to join us in this critical endeavor. Together, we can transform our response to disasters and ensure a more secure and prosperous Africa. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Director General, and extend our gratitude to the President of the bank and for his continued support and advocacy on behalf of ARC. We're very much encouraged by the bank's desire and commitment in developing other financial instruments beyond insurance so that we can respond to climate shock based on the need and the demand of the countries that we're targeting. And that's very, very uplifting and encouraging, particularly from the bank. Now, 13 years ago, when ARC was launched just as a concept, there was one institution that really believed in it, hosted ARC, provided the support, and was by our side for the past 13 years when many were actually doubting that you can utilize parametric insurance in building resilience. So fast forward 13 years later, after providing $1.2 billion worth of coverage, protected about 150 million people across the continent, but more importantly, made about $160 million of payout and trained about 2,000 Africans in disaster risk management. All of that, really, I think it's important to recognize the incredible role the WFP has played in making ARC a reality. So they are pretty much part of the ARC story, and I think they deserve a big round of applause for what they provide. And that is why, last but not least, I'm delighted to invite the country director for WFP for Ghana to be our last speaker, providing the goodwill messages on behalf of all of us for the work we do for the continent to make sure no one is left behind. So give a round of applause.
Good morning, distinguished participants and guests of this side meeting on regional climate disaster risk financing and outbreaks and epidemics management approaches. Also, good morning and thank you to the chair and chief facilitator, Ibrahima. I'm going to stand on the usual protocols and be very short because this is a goodwill message. I want to thank you all for your commitment to finding risk transfer instruments for emergency responses. As your presence here on this rainy Saturday morning evidences, you must think it's important if you would spend your time here, your personal time here. Just to chime in on Ibrahima's message, much of the historical work of ARC and today's deliberations are born out of WFP's evolved operational posture to not use a humanitarian development dichotomy, but a context-driven interventions to address root causes, consequences of disaster crisis, or opportunities for resilience as a way of working across the triple nexus. Ibrahima, you mentioned our evolution, but I also recall being, now that I recall being in Rome when WFP was scaling the use of cash transfer and a lot of the work that we did with ARC in looking at how we were going to operationalize the use of insurance for beneficiaries. I mention this because against this backdrop and considering lessons learned from our COVID-19 pandemic response, and also what's going on globally, what's going on in the continent, and in particular, and dear to me, Ghana, the context of Ghana, it's imperative that we find sustainable risk transfer instruments where always The right client receives the right benefit at the right time. Inherently, this implies that an Africa-informed solution and ownership that considers innovative early warning, anticipatory, and response interventions that are transformative, data-driven, timely, and harmonized through strategic partnerships to address climate and health hazards that impact lives, economic development, and of course, peace. With this, definitely we want to look back with no regrets that we've left anyone behind. And when I say anyone, I mean all of us. We're all from the continent here. We don't want to leave ourselves behind. And I think that, for me, that's the most important aspect of us finding solutions. To this end, WFP thanks ARC for facilitating this event and wish you all a fruitful deliberation today. Thank you.
That brings us to the end of our opening ceremony. Let me use this opportunity to thank sincerely on behalf of the entire group, all our speakers that came in representing global and African leaders, again, underscoring that global climate crisis calls for global solidarity. Over the next 2 hours, our team will be discussing the value addition of ARC, given the changing landscape in the climate finance world. It is important we continue to innovate so we can be competitive and respond to the needs of our member states. We will also spend some time discussing the collaboration with the REC. How do we further engage? How do we improve that engagement so that we can serve our member states? Last but not least, building on the spirit of this discussion about partnership, how do we forge the right partnership so that we can deliver on behalf of our member states? I will speak on behalf of everybody on stage here. We look forward to the outcome of your deliberation and your recommendation and make sure that we can do the best that we can so no one is left behind, including ourselves. Well, thank you very much, and that brings us to the end. Thank you. And Mr. MC, we'll promote me to the chief. You can now have back your microphone.
Thank you, man. Thank you very much, Chief Facilitator Ibrahima. We have now come to the official close of the opening ceremony. We will now have a group family photo just by the fountain, opposite the fountain, the main entrance steps. And then we'll have tea, coffee break for about 20 minutes. And as the DG indicated, we'll proceed to the technical session and all the segments to come out with those tangible, actionable recommendations. So we can proceed now for the group photo. Thank you.